I think one of the distinctions as well is during the private operation, you're talking about informed participants taking part in assessing a pilot. If you go to the other environment where they're doing a medical evacuation, there's uninformed participants in the form of passengers on the aircraft, and that is what the OPC is essentially aiming at. It's aiming at making sure both pilots are capable of handling an abnormal situation when you've got passengers on board, and that's the distinction.
Senator Patrick.
I wouldn't necessarily try and make a distinction between lives. I think Mr Campbell's life is just as important as...
Nobody's making a distinction between lives, Senator. We're just explaining the difference between private.
It was a distinction between informed participants.
Just going back to pilot number 6, he hadn't had any checks, but my understanding, he was only new to the company, so he hadn't had any checks with that company.
This is the one I brought up at the very end?
Yeah,
number
the
6.
co-pilot, I think, number 6.
Number 7, or 6 and 7, they hadn't had line checks.
Yes, hang on.
They hadn't had line checks within that company, but they were new to the company.
I'm not sure which ones we're referring to now.
It's hard to... Well, Mr Carmody's got them, so just take your time.
We didn't number them.
3, 4, 5, and you got 6 and 7.
6 and 7 there. Yeah.
So 6 and 7 were the new ones, I think. We're just reading through it now, Chair, if I may. Take your time. But
Yes, they were line checks, that's correct.
okay. So what's a line check involved? You'll have to give me some tolerance on this, Senator Patrick, because you're a pilot. I'm not. But
Mr Campbell's a pilot.
So after
what's a line check?
After you've completed your training and got the required minimum hours to fly, you do a check, which can be done on a revenue flight because it doesn't involve actual emergencies. You discuss emergencies, but it's more a check of following operating procedures and the crew drills which I talked about before to make sure that you're safe.
And in these circumstances, who would conduct a line check? Number one?
An approved check pilot within the organisation.
Yeah, which is number 1?
Depending on the type, there's 3 check pilots for the 3 different aircraft types.
Yep.
Okay, so we're in a situation where we've got a number of pilots who haven't validly met their licence requirements, but I think we're saying they're competent to fly. Is that right? Not proficient, but competent.
To fly. I'm saying I don't believe that they've conducted their instrument proficiency and operational proficiency checks. I think in a proficiency sense, I think they're competent to fly, and many of them have many hours, but they have not completed their operational proficiency, or I am not confident that their cascading checks, because they are the leaders of the company who should be managing the other checks, have been done satisfactorily. I do not know. Why would I have confidence if they hadn't been able to keep their own checking and training up to date that they had checked everybody else appropriately? I just, at this stage, Senator, I don't know. And so that's why we made the decision.
Okay, and when you're saying you were never contacted prior, no one in CASA was contacted prior to the 16th when this flight took place, or was when there was a request for a heart transplant?
As far as I know,
I'm not aware of any contact they made.
We were told on the 21st or 22nd by the owner of that company when he came in and said that he'd have to turn down a heart transplant flight, and the patient had died, were the 2 things that we were told. And that's why we questioned why that had occurred. That was the 21st. We have, as far as I know, we have no indication that there was any contact prior to that. I understand the timing was very short between, he said, like 1:30 and 3:30 in the morning or something along those lines.
Okay. In your opening statement, you made the point that the company grounded itself. It wasn't CASA that grounded.
Did.
Are you aware of an email that was sent by Mark Bergen on the 8th of December to the company?
No, I'm not, Senator.
Let me just read from it.
Share it with us.
It says, I respectfully ask you to ensure that any flight crew members identified through this audit process who have lapsed from the period of competency checks does not participate in FalconAir operations until the requisite competency checks are completed. Mm-hmm. Now, would it be reasonable to expect a chief pilot or other pilots, having received that email, to then decide against that request?
Senator, I think that they'd already made up their mind that they already knew they were outside of the regulatory requirement.
No, I think they stopped flying after that email. I'm asking you, if would it be reasonable for anyone to receive from a CASA official, from the Flying Operations Inspector of the Safety Assurance Branch, words to the effect that please ensure that these people do not participate in FalconAir operations until the requisite competency checks are completed. You don't see that in any way as something that
a
would...
statement of the law.
It's just the...
If the person who falls out of proficiency doesn't lose their license,
Sure.
they lose the privilege to conduct certain kinds of flights.
The question is, well, how would a reasonable person interpret that? Would they interpret that your operations can't continue while these 7 people are in
No,
some
I think
various
in respect to each of those pilots, the reasonable pilot would say, geez, you're right, I am out of proficiency, I better go do this. And the company would say, geez, you're out of proficiency, you better go do it so you can continue to exercise your privileges.
And what would have happened if those pilots had continued to fly, if they'd continued
Without
to
being in
operate?
proficiency,
Yeah.
they would have been committing an offence.
They would have been committing an offence under CAR 217 and CAR 215.
Yeah, and the offence would have been articulated in the company's own operations manual that says you must not do these things unless you meet these tests. And the regulations simply say you must comply with the provisions of your ops manual.
Well,
The
what
exec-
if
That email was also sent when Mark Bergman knew of only 5 of the pilots not being current. He later found out that 8 out of 9 weren't current.
Sure.
So that's an important fact. When
Sure.
he said those pilots shouldn't operate, he was of the understanding that the rest of the pilots, well, he didn't really know the status in the rest of the pilots.
Neither did we.
And neither did we.
So he could have, if we're going to hypothesise about what they might have thought about it, we need to hypothesise also that we only knew that there were 5 out of currency out of their 9. So theoretically, Mr. Bergen might have expected that they had other pilots who were competent because we hadn't been through that check.
But
this
Mr.
time.
Carmody, wouldn't one of the first questions, so maybe this is to Mr. Campbell, when you learn that, number one, the check and test man in the company is not proficient, and I'm assuming he was one of the 2 you're talking about that you did know, wouldn't your very next question be, how many of these others have you checked and tested?
That
That's
was
exactly
where,
what happened.
that's
Sorry,
what triggered the 2-day audit on the 6th and 7th
Of,
December, the 2 days before the Dominic James flight. The discussion said, well, if he's out of check, who else is? Let's go and have a look.
So they put a pilot forward who was out of check, which, as I said to you before, Chair, they put a pilot forward who was out of check. That surprised us. So
Yes.
we went in for a very quick audit or a very quick check on the 6th and 7th and have a look, and then we found more.
Yeah.
And
what
subsequently...
date's this, Senator Patrick?
This is on the 6th and 7th. The audit took place
On December.
of December, and then the flight took place on the.
No, but
when
what date
was
was
that
on that
email?
email or letter?
That was on the 8th.
So quite legitimate to expect that that was based on the views of the 6th and 7th. We went in subsequent to that and found more. So the lead indicator that we had from the first failed check pilot was correct.
That would be consistent
But
with
you
what
do
we
an
would do with
audit on the
anyone.
6th and the 7th.
We didn't get to see all the records, did we?
No, we weren't expecting to find what was found. So there was a very
No,
short...
but was it conducted on the 6th and the 7th?
Yes.
And by the end of business on the 7th, did you have a sense then that the out-of-date check and test pilot had checked and tested any number of pilots in the company? You would have had to have known.
I wasn't in the office then because I was out doing the Dominic flight.
Let's just do it hypothetically then. If you've sent a team of competent people in to do an audit over a 2-day period, and that's the full length of the audit, started one day and finished at the end of the other, would you expect that they had completed their work?
The view was that they had to go back in again because they ran out of time. But they'd
Right, so
notified-
2 days wasn't enough.
No, it
So-
notified the company that there was a 2-day audit, so they'd plan their own staff around 2 days.
Yes.
So it's not reasonable to extend it.
So do
Straight away.
you know, Mr Campbell, either directly or through what you've been told, as to what they knew at the end of the second day with respect to how many of these pilots had been checked and tested by the check and test pilot? I mean,